Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today we'll be talking about interesting topics with academic experts. We have with us Dr. Nikolaos. He is a senior lecturer in Department of Philosophy at the University of Liverpool. He is an expert in philosophy of arts, aesthetics, and Greek philosophy. So we are here today to discuss about aesthetics in philosophy, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Jay, for inviting me, for giving me the opportunity, and I hope whoever listens or watches this can get their minds working and maybe ask questions. Can they get back to you about questions?
They can get back to us.
I'm happy to come back and respond then.
Sure, thank you so much. So, can you please tell us about aesthetics in general? Because in general, how we perceive aesthetics is mostly like, the thing should be good looking, it should be pleasing to eyes, with good color, good color coordination and stuff. So, like, how philosophy looks at aesthetics?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It sounds a bit niche or strange for philosophy to deal with such tangible material or topic. I sometimes open up my initial lectures or introductory sessions with students by saying, but most people when they hear aesthetics, they think of maybe things like cosmetics and looking after your skin or your face or stuff like that, which is, I suppose, not wrong, but I would say it's just a very, very narrow aspect of what the whole thing might be. So, I mean, if we want to be precise, the word itself, aesthetics, isn't far removed from what you're saying. It does make you think of what we perceive, because actually the word itself comes from Greek and it means sense perception. So it is a relatively recent term, the term aesthetics, although I suppose you could say people and philosophers and cultures have always had an interest in the way things look. It was only in the 18th century, actually, if we're focusing on the term itself, that a philosopher, motivated by the fact that there was a new type of philosophy, rationalist philosophy, looking at what we can prove simply by focusing on correct reasoning. People may know about Descartes. What is Descartes famous for? Proving. I think, therefore I am. Yeah. So he's then using that self-evident for him truth to derive various other truths, supposedly, about the world, about the existence of God and all that. And he does all that simply by focusing on on the type of reasoning he calls clear and distinct ideas, etc. So another philosopher, Baumgarten, working in the similar rationalistic school of thought, let's say, he was struck by this idea that although we have seemingly a science of reasoning and rational proof, we don't have a similar type of science, quote unquote, like thorough knowledge of what we perceive. So he basically founded or introduced this term aesthetics because in his mind he wanted to use it as a description of the science of sense perception. So can we, he was asking, can we come up with similarly unshakable or certain truths about what we perceive? And I suppose when we turn to things we perceive, as you said, we judge them to be appealing or not appealing, etc. So he wanted to check whether we have any proof about the matter. So that's the context. And as you can guess, it is a much wider approach because it potentially has application on everything that we can see, hear, imagine even. Actually, Baumgarten's main focus wasn't painting or sculpture or some of the arts that we consider as canonical, like music or stuff like that. His main point of reference was poetry. So he was interested in the aesthetics of poetry in the sense that poetry evokes images, triggers the imagination to think of sights, sounds, smells, events, facts, people, places, all sorts of things. So yeah, his project was wide-ranging in that sense, but still seemingly trying to focus on what we, not what we, I suppose, think in the abstract, logic, maths, reasoning, but what we think by using imagery and our senses. Sorry, a long-winded response. But
No, it's really beautiful to know
that's the
that.
context, yes.
Yeah, it's lovely to know that. And also, philosophy of arts, it also, it's also something I think we in general need to know. It's because philosophy is considered a part of arts, and there's a philosophy of arts where we'll also talk about one of your article on film as symbol. So also tell us about philosophy of arts in general. What things come in it?
Just to clarify, when you said philosophy is considered part of the arts, have you got something in mind? So are you saying that a philosophical text can be seen as a work of art, as a work of literature? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. I'll return to that in a moment. But
Sure.
but yeah, when we there's a question about what art is, I suppose. There's a question about what philosophy of art is, and there's a question about the relation between aesthetics and art. I suppose that's what you're implying. In principle, as long as there's been a culture, a human culture, there's been artifacts. By that we mean people have always made stuff. Okay?
Yeah.
So in a very basic level, art is something humans make, usually an object. It doesn't have to be an object, as I said, literature or poetry, which you don't even have to write down, you can recite. You don't even have to recite, you can just go through the poem in your head and relive those images, those experiences. So, but it's certainly something that comes from human creativity. So that's at the very basic level, that's what we should see as art. Now, every culture has had different approaches to these artifacts. For certain cultures, I suppose the further back we go in time, usually we have a strong link between artifacts and other types of rituals or practices. I mean, creating an artifact is a practice. It follows certain rules. So for ancient Greeks, for example, the word art, which is the same word in ancient Greek and modern Greek, simply meant a process of making something following rules. So it's a bit like craft or skillful activity that produces an artifact. Now that's what they would have seen as art. And why do you do that in a culture? Why do you produce this artifact following certain rules? I suppose it has to be something usually non-utilitarian. So if I create a spoon, that's in one of the dialogues by Plato we have this argument. You know, if you create a spoon or a ladle, yes, you don't have to make it gold and ornamental and decorative, okay? But if you add those features to it, you're doing it for some other reason, not the utilitarian reason. So that's, I suppose, a first kind of trace or sign of the fact that art seems to be going beyond the narrowly defined practical purposes of objects, of artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first level of distinction. Now, so obviously lots of centuries have passed, and if we look at various cultures, there's links between those types of artifacts that are not utilitarian and religious ritual, usually, or some sort of worship or some sort of practice like that is ceremonial and again serves no obvious practical purpose. Again, I'm only talking about the West, basically, because that's what I know most best. Okay, I suppose similar developments occur around the world, but in the West, just like in the 18th century, we had this invention of the term aesthetics. A bit earlier, maybe in the 17th century, we had this idea that art must be something more refined and more amenable to contemplative focus. So we are trying to make it further removed from its actual context in real life. And that's why we have the emergence of another type of concept, which is the concept of fine arts. All right? So there we have the attempt to separate clearly, neatly, if you like, all these other practices that produce stuff, things, from any practical purpose whatsoever. Because sometimes, as I said, with the ornamental spoon, it still has a practical purpose, okay? However, if you move it, if you go to sculpture, okay, or something like that, you try to remove any practical purpose from the actual artifact and have it simply there for the purpose of contemplating it, looking at it, admiring it, not using it for any purpose. So this notion of the fine arts, again, separated or introduced a clean break between what is mixed usage between what's beautiful and what's practical, and trying to completely separate the two and only put art on a pedestal, as we would say. And that happens when you go to the museum, okay? And that's the origins of the museum as we know it traditionally. You go there and you see you're not allowed to touch the art, usually, at least in more traditional settings. Things have been changing recently, but in traditional setting, you're not allowed to touch or go close to the art. You're not allowed to interact with it. It's simply there for you to contemplate. So, I can't remember now what you asked me exactly, but so that's a very, very quick history of art, of the notion of art as we have it. Do you want me to go back then to the philosophy of art? Because I suppose now that's the question that follows. If you think of what I said about aesthetics and what I'm saying now about art, do you see any difference between the two, art and aesthetics, just to help me respond to the question?
Not much, I would say.
Okay.
There's still a distinct difference of arts and aesthetic, is because aesthetic is primarily based on perception.
Yeah.
And arts is more of how would I say? It's more on a decorative side of things.
Yeah. Isn't that something you perceive? The quality that an artifact has?
Yeah, but for me, aesthetics, I mean, that's aesthetics still varies on person to person and how it perceives.
Yeah.
And there would always be a difference in perception from a person who created an art versus a person who is contemplating the art.
Okay, let's use an example. Sure. Have you got an artifact, a work of art in mind, just to use it as an example?
Let's let's go with that decorated golden spoon.
The golden spoon that is
Yeah.
highly decorated and nice to look
Yeah.
at. Okay, so that's an artifact. And give me an example of something that comes to mind when you think of aesthetics.
Maybe a good-looking room.
A room. Okay.
Yeah.
Hasn't the room been created by somebody
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have certain features?
Yeah.
Okay. I suppose a philosopher of art would say that both things are artifacts. Both things have qualities about them that we may or may not appreciate. So those qualities that have aesthetic, the aesthetic qualities are common to both. You can find aesthetic qualities in both. So they're both artifacts. Give me another example of something that has aesthetic qualities but isn't an artifact. Can you think of anything?
Maybe a car.
A car is also an artifact, one would say. It has also been made, actually.
Imagination.
Designers of cars want to make them look nice as well, right?
Sure, imagination.
Imagination of what?
Imagination of anything, maybe a different world of yourself.
Okay, so it's a bit like science fiction, let's say, yes?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
That's also literature, that's artifact. Somebody has made it, somebody has imagined it and offered it to us for appreciations, just like the spoon or just like the architect designing the room. So up to now we haven't found a difference between art and aesthetics, or the things that art and aesthetics contain or study.
Yeah.
I suppose if you wanted to find a difference, would be to ask yourself, are there any things that are beautiful although nobody has made them? No human being has made them. And that's when we turn to the nature, okay?
Yeah.
Natural things and events and scenes.
Mountains and
yes, exactly. So, or the moon and the stars and things like that. So those are not created by humans, but we still find them beautiful and appealing and all that. So you have there automatically a difference between the two in terms of their subject matter. Okay. Art deals with artifacts, things made by us. Again, trying to look at them from a non-utilitarian perspective, usually. Aesthetics can deal with both art, but also with non-created things by humans, I mean, like natural scenes and objects and events. So when Baumgarten was, introduced the science of aesthetics, he wasn't specifically thinking about art, although he was dealing with poetry. But his motivation, his ambition, was to provide the most general possible account of what perception applies to. So it can apply to artifacts, but also natural phenomena.
Wow, that's interesting.
Go back to you, and whatever I've left unanswered, please go back to the question, what it was.
So, no, you've answered almost everything. My point now goes on to understanding. It's because now when we see the difference of art focuses on something which comes under the periphery of aesthetics, but aesthetics also focus on something which is beyond art, or something which is beyond created by us.
Yes.
How does it then goes on to understand? Because I'm thinking from more of a religious perspective, in the sense that mountains, moon, stars, all these things, when we do not find it, we do not find ourselves capable of replicating them or creating them. We think that it is created by God.
Yeah, I mean that is a possible interpretation, and then you can say God, the creator, and everything is beautiful because the creator is wise and good and all that. Yeah.
My question then comes in, then if we go on with this lens that there is still a creator and these are the artifacts of the creator, then does art tends to contain these things inside it as well?
Well, Yeah, I mean,
those
yeah.
contexts?
So you're saying everything is an artifact, even things that weren't created by us. Yeah, possibly, but then that would be theology, maybe, or something else. It wouldn't necessarily be philosophy of art. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you could have you could have a sort of a niche again type of philosophy of art which looks at everything as artifacts. And indeed,
Okay.
when I talk to my students about when we go through the relationship between art and aesthetics, I do mention to them there is a possibility that everything is art. Okay, and that's theoretically possible, but it's just not really the mainstream view. And to be honest with you, it wouldn't make a huge difference. It would just mean that aesthetics and art are the same, but then we still have the problem of explaining what it is that makes things beautiful. What sort of what is beauty? What types of qualities are appealing to us, and why? So yeah, it changes the scope that we are studying, the scope of things, but really the questions more or less remain. There's an interesting case of philosophers like Hegel, who is again a sort of an Enlightenment figure, German philosopher, who thought that not exactly that everything is art, but because of his own metaphysics, because of the fact that he saw everything in nature, including nature and human existence, human beings, as part of the same kind of story, the same kind of stuff which goes through stages of development. He would have called it absolute spirit. So for him, there's a continuum between nature and humanity, between what we create and what seems to be uncreated. The continuity is that they are different stages of the same process. So that perhaps could be another way of uniting art and aesthetics. And for Hegel, the only interesting area of study is philosophy of art. There is no aesthetics. Philosophy of art coincides, if you like, with aesthetics, and there's no point in studying nature as something unrelated to this process of creation. But as I say, that's a relatively marginal approach nowadays.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, and it presupposes a lot of metaphysics, a lot of theory about what is real, what reality is made up of. So, which takes us to various other areas. Yeah.
Interesting. And coming to movies, films as a piece of art, because I read your article, Film as Symbol.
Right. Yeah.
So that's you've talked very interestingly about symbols in that article. So like if you can just help us know in detail of what's your perspective.
Yeah. First of all, to clarify, well, not clarify. I want to go back because you asked also what counts as art. Nowadays we are more sort of liberal and open as to what we will accept as valid objects of philosophical study in terms of arts. So we're moving a bit further beyond the canon of the fine arts. I mean, traditionally we only had sculpture, painting, architecture, music, literature, dance. Okay, so that was that. Obviously, in the 19th century specifically, we have a big technical development, which was the invention of photography. And obviously from that, film followed. And I suppose now we have all sorts of re-evaluation of other crafts that we would have thought they're not as valid because they are not, they have some utility built in them, and that was seen as not necessarily a good thing. Nowadays we're opening up in that respect. But film is definitely one of the greatest developments in the area of the arts in the 20th century. Now, the paper you're referring to, that point, I was motivated by the fact that I had studied for my PhD a philosopher called Nelson Goodman, and I was trying to apply some of what I thought was his contribution to the philosophy of art onto film. So it was just an attempt on my part to provide an example of how Goodman's approach would help us make sense of an art form like film. So symbol in this case is, I don't know, what do you understand if I say symbol? If somebody says symbol, what do you think they mean?
Symbol, I think they would mostly, we would understand symbol as like a sort of summarizing a meaning into one
Right.
One image,
Okay. Yes.
one figure, or something like that.
Yeah, that's great. So the key word here is meaning. So for Goodman and others, I suppose, art isn't just something to enjoy because it looks nice, or rather, we enjoy it and we think, or we say it looks nice or it sounds appealing because something else is happening at that point. So what is this other thing that's happening? The thing that is happening has to do with meaning and understanding. So what is happening actually when we find beauty, or whatever you want to call it, is that we recognize something, could be an object or an image or a sound or a group of sounds or a group of images, which is what a film is, yeah? We see that, and we recognize it as a trigger of meanings. So this thing happens to stand for elements that enhance our understanding, give rise to further questions, further ideas and theories, and enriches our own ability to make sense of the world around us. So that's what happens when, for Goodman and others, a film is an artifact which both the people who make it and the people who appreciate it engage in that practice for a reason. What is that reason? Because this practice of making it or watching it allows us to make better sense of ourselves and the world. So it's, in effect, it's a process of, I wouldn't call it understanding in the intellectual sense, but it's a process of understanding in the wider sense, of making sense of making one's own, making the world and our place in it make sense, okay? Allowing it to make sense, understanding it. And obviously that's a very complex process. That's why art has all this variety and multiplicity, and that's why we can't explain it in words.
Yeah.
If we could explain it in words, the art would be superfluous. There would be no reason to engage in it. So yeah, that paper film art symbol was my attempt. I don't remember much about it, to be honest, and probably for the best. But it was an attempt to just show how this theory could help us explain the significance of this particular art form, but also any other.
Interesting. So, just this thought occurred in my mind. Is I was just revisiting this idea because film, movies, all these things right now are considered as mode of entertainment. So all the pieces of arts is sort of, if we go with this lens, is now having a utilitarian view or a utilitarian output as an entertainment, including poetry, music, dance, film, or even going for adventures just to experience nature. So how do you think has this the utilitarian output to the arts uh, would create an impact in terms of how we look at arts in future?
Yeah, that's a huge issue, isn't it? I mean, and that's why I suppose the proponents of the fine arts, the traditional kind of attempt to put a barrier between what is useful and what is there purely for contemplation, that's what it wants to avoid. To avoid this falling into entertainment and a meaningless pleasure and all that. Now, my initial response will be to say that things tend to be, in philosophy and in reality, things don't have clear boundaries in general. So where does entertainment stop and art begin, or the other way around? I don't think there are clear boundaries. Where does pleasure of the body stop and higher pleasure of the mind begin? Indeed, Plato, to go back to one of Plato's, the same dialogue where they were talking about what makes something a beautiful or something along those lines. They were trying to make a distinction between pleasures that cause pain if there's too much of them. Okay, that's why food can't be an art, for example. And pleasures that any excess can't cause pain, like the pleasures you get from sight, from seeing. And therefore, that's why painting and sculpture and all that are higher forms. I mean, I don't know that there is a very clear boundary between the two, and I don't know that we can always say what is useful can't be beautiful or can't be appealing. So yes, it is true that entertainment and the culture industry uses artistic means to achieve certain ends, but it also uses other things. It uses political messaging. It uses social cues. It uses all sort of rhetoric. It uses materials and ideas and practices from all sorts of areas. So I don't think it's specifically affecting the arts, okay? It's just a different type of practice. Somebody may be interested in reading books because they want to show off how clever they are, okay? Somebody may be doing exactly the same thing because they enjoy that thing itself and they want to feel they've improved their own understanding. So I don't see any clear-cut boundary between the two. It could be a very popular artist, entertainer rather, who's also a great artist, okay? Based on various criteria. So the question is, I suppose, how are we going to make those distinctions more helpful by focusing on certain aspects of those, of what people do in those areas? So yeah, it is an important factor, the how art can be used to certain other effects that may not be relevant, but that's not just a problem with art, it's a problem with any other area of inquiry or knowledge or practice.
That's interesting. So what's your personal favorite topic when it comes to philosophy?
You know, I find it very difficult to answer these questions. What's your favorite book? What's your favorite film? I can't really, I don't have a list of first, second, third, but I usually sort of think of what I'm doing now, what I'm doing next, stuff like that. So I suppose a very, somebody would say silly question in philosophy is, what is philosophy? You might think, because at the beginning when you asked me about art and aesthetics and all that, and you mentioned the expert's view and the layperson's view. Well, in a lot of respects, the layperson's question and the expert's question in philosophy is the same. You know, what are we doing? My focus is going to be on the teaching of it, okay? Because I'm teaching and I'm in charge of the program of studies here at the university, the department, and I want to see how we can develop this notion of philosophy as a discipline that isn't really about learning content. I mean, obviously, you need to know something about the ideas that philosophers have dealt with, the theories that they have put across and argued for, and all that. But it's not a matter of providing a list of these theories and ideas.
Right.
I suppose if you're training to become a doctor, you need to know what symptoms go with what disease, what the treatment is for each disease, and all. So you need to know a certain number of facts.
Right.
In philosophy, you need to know a certain number of facts in terms of what philosophers have claimed, but that is not philosophy. Philosophy is the way you do it, the way you treat those arguments, those theories, and the way you make them make sense. I think I mentioned earlier Goodman's theory about art being a way of us making sense of the world. So I suppose philosophy is the same thing, but obviously doing it through concepts and trying to clarify your thoughts and put them in some order. So which is not exactly what art does. But overall, it's the same objective, the same need we find ourselves having to satisfy. So yeah, this is my immediate sort of short-term project, to see how we can incorporate that approach to philosophy further into our curriculum. Of course, it's already in what we do, but maybe make it a bit more explicit by offering a slightly different program like philosophy and counseling. I know that, again, when people hear of counseling, they think of some sort of psychological advice session that will help you deal with your problems. But when we talk about philosophy and counseling, it's more about going through ideas and concepts with the purpose of clarifying them for ourselves and making sense of what's happening to us. Not necessarily because there's something wrong with what's happening to us, but simply because we want to improve our quality of life. We want to become better people. So that's my immediate short-term project.
Wow.
There are, since you've asked, there are two other areas that I have done no work in, but I've always been interested. One of them is a slightly overlooked area of philosophy of art and smell. Okay?
Wow.
So obviously we talk a lot about works of art in terms of what we see, what we touch, what we hear, what we imagine through literature and poetry. But there's been very little work on what types of smells we find appealing, the art of perfumery, the art of making things appealing through scents, etc. So that's one kind of further down the line project potentially. And maybe further down the line something to do with a specific art form within music, which is singing and song. So something to do with the human voice and the way it's been used historically to convey musical ideas, expressions, and stuff like that, and whether it has always had a special place in music. But why is it, and how do we interpret it, and etc. So again, that's something further down the line.
Interesting. That's pretty interesting, because I am also a professional life coach, and something into counseling is always interesting to me.
There you go.
So yeah, I'm very much interested in how that idea turns out to be, how the project turns out to be. So yeah, do you have any questions or any feedback or anything for me?
I just wanted to go further back a bit to the point you made about philosophy and philosophy being an art form, and I think I may kind of know what you meant, because in the we also had a little discussion about that during the break. Are we allowed to mention the break? So when I came to this country to study, it's been, actually I've lived in this country now more than I've lived in my home country, which is Greece. So when I first came to study here, yes, it was a bit strange to me to see that philosophy was seen as part of the school of the art. So it was seen as an art. But I quickly realized that we don't really mean art in this case as in an art form alongside music and literature and drama and all that. Maybe art in this case means something that studies texts or deals with texts, what we might also call the humanities, the sciences of people. In other languages, like in Greek, a science isn't confined to what we would call the science of nature, physics and chemistry. Okay, a science is simply an expertise in a field. Okay, so in that sense, you could be a scientist even as a philosopher if you've been studying the field long enough. So yeah, I've taken it since then in a slightly, I've understood the term arts in this context as basically referring to the humanities. Indeed, the School of the Arts in the university here at Liverpool includes music, architecture, English, communications and media. So I suppose the only arts per se are architecture and music. Maybe English literature is part of that. However, there's a slight variation to this theory. The slight variation is to say that actually philosophy is an art form, in the sense that it consists in texts which are constitutive of a special literary genre. It's a special type of text, and therefore, just as we study science fiction, poetry, autobiography, we might also study philosophy. Indeed, actually, the very first philosopher in the West, Plato, wrote in a dialogical form, and it is itself a literary genre. It is the philosophical dialogue. So it was invented, devised for the sole purpose of conveying philosophical ideas. So I suppose one could look at that and say, yeah, philosophy is a literary genre. So we could see ourselves as technicians, craftspeople of a particular discourse that follows a certain history methodology that's been traditionally established over the centuries, etc.
Interesting.
My question to you would be, because you mentioned coaching and life coaching, how do you have any guiding theories or thinkers or practitioners that have helped you in your own approach to this or your practice? And how does it work? Where did you get your ideas from when you started doing this?
So I won't just say this one specific person or something. It's because it's mostly based on what experiences I had. It's because it began during COVID when I began my undergrad in a university, and there I got to interact with people, and during that interaction I got my friends would share their problems, and they would say, oh, I'm facing this, I'm facing that. And from there I thought that, okay, this could be done, that could be done. And they were like, yeah, it helped, you gave us a new perspective. So that was something which I would say that it gave me an idea that this is something which I can perceive as a skill. And then later on I got to know that, okay, there's an online course somewhere I can learn. And then I trained myself into being a professional life coach. And the only thing I think that is helping me is because I'm learning with these interactions. I'm learning through listening podcasts, I'm learning through all these things to gain new perspective. And with philosophy I'm gaining the skill of critical thinking, so that I can learn new perspective, churn them, and maybe use it to help someone. So yeah, in that sense I could. So there's not one person, it's an experiences put together.
Yeah. Sounds like a good thing to do. Anyway,
Yeah, thank you so much. And
thank
thank you
you.
so much for having it, for giving us your time and
Great.
sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. To the next time then.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.